In many suburban communities, authority often takes on a curious, unofficial form. It doesn't always come from elected officials or formal HOA leadership. Sometimes, it comes from the loudest voice at the block party or the neighbor who never misses a board meeting. These self-appointed stewards of the neighborhood culture operate under the belief that their perspective defines the community. Their authority isn't grounded in fact or responsibility, it's rooted in assumption. And that assumption can be a powerful, if fragile, force. The moment someone says, "This is a family community," it often carries an unspoken implication: "I know what this community is supposed to be, and you don't." It's a declaration disguised as concern, often spoken by someone who has never questioned whether their version of community includes everyone. But what happens when that authority meets someone who not only belongs, but who literally helped build the community they claim to protect? My husband is a contractor. Not the kind with a glossy Instagram portfolio and a coffee table book on minimalist kitchens. He's the kind who rises before the sun, sketches foundations on paper napkins, and gets calluses on his hands from turning blueprints into actual homes. He's been building neighborhoods for 2 decades. The street we live on. He poured the foundation for every house on it. The park where local families gather. He laid the brick path winding through it. The lighting, the drainage, even the community sign at the entrance, he had a hand in all of it. But when a woman like Carol, a neighbor we barely knew, approaches me with a tight smile and those 5 words, "This is a family community," what she really means is, "I don't recognize you as part of it." There's a subtle but cutting judgment behind that phrase, as though my mere presence disrupted her understanding of what the neighborhood should look like. It wasn't just about me walking my dog or the tone of my voice or what I was wearing. It was about her belief that she had a greater claim to the community than I did. Carol didn't ask if I was new. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't know my name, let alone my husband's. But she had appointed herself a kind of neighborhood sentinel, a protector of some imagined purity of place. In doing so, she overlooked the real story, that the very ground she walks on was prepared and paved by someone she's never seen at an HOA meeting, someone who doesn't show up to block parties or ring doorbells with baked goods, but who literally made the neighborhood possible. This kind of assumption isn't rare. In fact, it's common in spaces where appearances matter more than origins, and where loud voices tend to drown out quiet contributions. Communities are often shaped by those who don't demand recognition, who work behind the scenes, who build and fix and maintain without asking for a spotlight. Yet, they're the ones who understand the place most intimately, not the ones who declare ownership through social policing. There's a strange irony in being told you don't belong somewhere that wouldn't exist without you. It raises questions about what gives someone the right to speak for a whole community. Is it tenure? Popularity? Proximity to the board president? Or is it simply the confidence to assume authority in the absence of facts? In Carol's mind, she was safeguarding her version of family values. But in doing so, she erased the very labor and legacy that made her comfort possible. Communities are often admired for their beauty, order, and sense of cohesion. Streets are clean, lawns are manicured, sidewalks are smooth, and lights glow gently along the roads at dusk. But what's rarely acknowledged is the immense amount of invisible labor it takes to create and sustain that environment. Long before any family moves in, long before the rules are written or the HOA newsletters are sent, there are people, real people, who design, dig, pour, hammer, wire, and level every detail of that space. These people are often not seen once the community is complete, but their work remains in every square foot. My husband is one of those people. He's been in construction for most of his adult life, working on developments that stretch across counties. He's not just a worker, he's the guy who shows up before the first plans are approved and stays until the last screw is turned. He's walked empty lots at dawn, imagining where children will someday play. He's worked in harsh weather, handled last-minute changes from developers, and solved problems no one else even noticed. He's been there for the messy parts, when it's just dirt, tools, noise, and vision. And yet, when the neighborhood becomes a polished, Pinterest-worthy reality, people like him become invisible. What's fascinating is how quickly that labor is forgotten. Residents move in, admire the layout, praise the architecture, complain about minor flaws, and assume that the beauty of the place simply exists, as if it grew organically from the ground. The long days, the physical toll, the creative problem-solving, and the sacrifices made to meet impossible timelines are reduced to a given. The assumption is that the place was built for them, not by someone. When Carol made her comment, "This is a family community," she wasn't just ignoring my presence. She was dismissing the very labor that made her lifestyle possible. It's not just about one person making a snide remark. It's about a larger issue of how society undervalues and overlooks the people behind the infrastructure of our lives. My husband's work isn't glamorous or loud. He doesn't show up at community events talking about the concrete mix ratio or the drainage gradient beneath the road. But his fingerprints are all over this place, even if no one sees them. It's not just physical labor that's ignored, it's the emotional and mental energy that goes into building something that will serve people who may never know your name. My husband takes pride in his work not because someone thanks him, but because he knows that what he builds matters. That sense of pride is rarely returned. There are no plaques, no dedications, no neighborhood tours pointing out the craftsmanship. Instead, there's an unspoken expectation that the community has always looked this way, that the work was automatic, anonymous, and owed. Invisible labor extends beyond the act of building. Even after the homes are sold, there's continued upkeep, silent repairs, last-minute fixes requested by management companies before inspections. These tasks don't come with recognition either. They happen early in the morning or late at night, when most of the residents are still asleep or winding down for the day. The community continues to function because someone is always behind the curtain, making sure it does. Invisibility doesn't mean absence. It means presence without acknowledgement. It means walking down a street you helped build, while others act like you've just arrived. It means knowing every corner of a place while being treated like an outsider. It means your labor is everywhere, but your presence is questioned. Gatekeeping in suburbia doesn't always come in the form of policies or official restrictions. More often, it's quiet, coded, and socially enforced. It happens in the way people look at each other, in the questions they ask at the mailbox, in the tone of voice used during friendly reminders about trash bins or noise levels. It's a form of cultural policing that's not written in any HOA bylaws but is deeply ingrained in the attitudes of certain residents who believe they hold the keys to what the neighborhood is supposed to be. When someone tells you, "This is a family community," they're rarely just stating a fact. They're drawing a boundary. A line between who belongs and who doesn't. They're saying, "I've decided what this place is meant to be, and I'll decide who fits into it." In Carol's case, that boundary was invisible but deeply felt. Her words weren't about family or community, they were about control. A kind of soft power used to enforce a social code she assumed everyone had agreed upon, without ever asking. Gatekeeping like this thrives in spaces where conformity is encouraged and difference is viewed with suspicion. The suburbs are often sold as havens of safety, order, and predictability. But beneath that image lies a need to protect a very narrow idea of what normal looks like. And that's where people like Carol come in. They're not elected, they're not appointed, but they act as if they've been handed a badge of moral authority. They patrol the sidewalks with their eyes, monitor tone, behavior, even parking habits, and offer unsolicited feedback under the guise of community care. The irony is that many of the people doing the gatekeeping arrived only after the hard work of building the neighborhood was already done. They move in once the grass is laid, the porches are painted, and the fences are up. They didn't pour concrete, or dig trenches, or endure delays and permits. But they quickly take ownership, not of the homes they bought, but of the collective culture they believe should surround them. And anyone who doesn't reflect that culture becomes a target for correction or exclusion. Gatekeeping doesn't always look hostile. Sometimes it looks like a smile paired with a backhanded comment. Sometimes it's a neighbor's assumption that you're a renter, not a homeowner. Sometimes it's the way people pause before asking, "So, how long have you lived here?" as if trying to determine whether your presence is temporary or permanent, whether they need to make space for you or wait for you to go. This form of social control keeps communities from evolving. It discourages new voices, new perspectives, and new energy from entering. It puts pressure on residents to perform a version of acceptable neighbor, instead of simply living their lives. It reinforces class dynamics, racial dynamics, and unspoken hierarchies that no one ever officially acknowledges, but everyone who's been on the receiving end can feel. What's most striking is how invisible the gatekeepers believe they are. They don't see themselves as enforcers. They see themselves as protectors. They believe they're upholding standards, not excluding people. But the impact is the same. It creates a community that feels less like a shared space and more like a club with unclear membership rules. Rules that can shift at any time, depending on who's watching, who's talking, and who dares to walk their dog past the wrong yard. Gatekeeping isn't about keeping things safe, it's about keeping things the same. It's about resisting disruption, even if that disruption is just someone living their life differently than expected. It's a quiet force, but a powerful one, and it shows up in the most mundane places. Perception is one of the most powerful forces in any community. It shapes how we interact, how we assign value, and how we determine who belongs. In suburban neighborhoods especially, perception can carry more weight than fact. The way someone dresses, the car they drive, how loudly they laugh, how often they attend HOA meetings, all these small signals add up to create an image, and that image often overshadows the truth of who someone really is or what they contribute. When Carol told me, "This is a family community," she wasn't reacting to anything objective. She didn't know who I was, where I came from, what my values were, or what role my family had played in the creation of the very street she lived on. She was reacting to a perception. Something about me didn't match the picture she had in her head of what this community is supposed to look like. And that was enough for her to assume I didn't belong. That's the strange thing about perception, it doesn't require evidence. It just needs repetition and comfort. Carol likely saw people who looked and acted like her, and over time, she began to associate that with what was right, what was safe, and what was good for the community. Anything outside that image became a threat, or at the very least, a disruption. In this way, perception becomes a filter that keeps people in roles that may not reflect who they are at all. Reality, on the other hand, is much quieter. It's less visible, less performative. It doesn't announce itself with flyers or complaints to the HOA board. It just exists. Like my husband's work, the streets, the gutters, the hidden infrastructure that makes this neighborhood run, it's foundational, but invisible. People step over it every day, benefiting from it, without ever realizing what they're relying on. That's what truth often is, unnoticed but essential. The tension between perception and reality creates a strange kind of imbalance. People are judged more by how well they conform to expectations than by what they actually bring to the table. Someone can make massive contributions to a neighborhood and still be seen as not quite fitting in, because their story doesn't align with the dominant narrative. And someone else can do almost nothing meaningful but be perceived as an ideal neighbor, simply because they play the part convincingly. That gap is where misunderstanding and exclusion thrive. Carol didn't see a woman whose husband built her home. She didn't see a family that had been here since the foundation was poured. She saw a person she didn't recognize as part of the existing image. Her perception overrode the facts, and in doing so, she revealed just how fragile those assumptions really are. Communities built on perception are always unstable. They feel safe, but only if you stay within the lines. The moment someone deviates, even slightly, the illusion starts to crack. That's why people like Carol react the way they do. They're not just enforcing norms, they're protecting an identity, one that might not survive too much truth. Because once reality gets a voice, perception has to adjust, and that adjustment can be deeply uncomfortable for those who've relied on it for their sense of belonging and power. The deeper issue is how easily people accept perception as fact when it benefits them. It's easier to trust assumptions than to ask questions. It's easier to categorize than to connect. But in doing so, communities lose the richness of their true makeup. They become narrow, closed off, and performative. They function more like a stage than a shared home. The phrase, family community, gets used a lot in neighborhoods like ours, often with an air of pride, as if it's the highest possible standard. It's printed on brochures, included in real estate listings, and repeated in HOA meetings like a mission statement. On the surface, it sounds wholesome and welcoming, a place where kids ride bikes, parents wave from driveways, and everyone feels safe. But beneath that phrase is a more complicated question: who gets to define what a family community really means? For some people, family has a narrow, fixed image. It's a married couple, probably with children, maybe a dog, and a routine that looks like a Hallmark movie. Anything outside of that framework, single parents, couples without kids, chosen families, multi-generational households, same-sex couples, is often seen as an exception rather than a norm. The problem isn't the existence of that traditional image, it's the assumption that it's the only one that counts. When someone like Carol uses the phrase, family community, it's not always about promoting togetherness. Sometimes it's a way of drawing limits. Defining a community by one kind of family inherently excludes others. It creates an unspoken expectation about who fits and who doesn't. And that expectation shows up in small, everyday interactions, side comments, cold greetings, a lack of invitations, or a feeling of being observed more than welcomed. It becomes clear that some families are seen as proof that the community is thriving, while others are treated like potential risks to its character. When Carol made her comment to me, she wasn't just speaking about values. She was making a judgment. Without knowing anything about my life, my marriage, or my background, she decided I didn't align with her definition of what this place is supposed to represent. She didn't ask if I had kids, or if I had built a life here, or if my family was part of the literal foundation of her home. She relied on her own version of what a family community looks like, and used it as a standard to measure everyone else. This isn't just about personal bias. It's about power. When someone defines what kind of family is acceptable, they also control who feels safe, included, and respected. That control is often exercised subtly. It's not about overt discrimination, it's about tone, posture, the kinds of conversations that happen behind closed doors, the votes cast at HOA meetings, and the way rules are selectively enforced. The image of a family community becomes a tool to maintain a social order that benefits a specific type of resident while quietly pushing others to the margins. What makes this more frustrating is the irony. My husband and I didn't just move here. We didn't just buy a house and start fresh. We helped build this place, literally and emotionally. We understand the meaning of family, of stability, of investing in a future. But because we didn't fit the script that Carol had in her head, we became outsiders in a story we helped write. Her definition of family had no room for the hands that built her porch or the labor that shaped her street. Communities that rely on narrow definitions will always be incomplete. They miss out on the beauty of real diversity, not just in identity, but in experience, story, and contribution. They risk becoming echo chambers of sameness, where belonging is based on appearances rather than values. The irony is that the families who often do the most to sustain and improve these neighborhoods are the very ones most likely to be excluded by that narrow lens. They don't need a welcome sign. They've already put in the work. There's a certain satisfaction that comes with telling the truth, especially when it's been ignored or buried under assumptions. In neighborhoods where appearances are everything and social dynamics thrive on subtle control, the truth can be a disruptive force, but also a liberating one. Humor, in particular, becomes a tool not just for coping but for cutting through the noise. When someone tries to police your presence with a line like, "This is a family community," and you know the street under their feet was poured by your husband, the only thing left to do is tell the story, with a little smirk, a little edge, and a lot of clarity. For a long time, people like me were expected to stay silent, to shrug off the microaggressions of neighborhood culture, to laugh politely and move along. There's an unspoken rule in many communities that if you don't fit the dominant mold, your best option is to blend in, not stand out. Don't push back. Don't be difficult. Don't rock the boat. That's how the gatekeepers maintain control, not through confrontation, but through quiet expectations of silence. But silence is exhausting. And it doesn't change anything. So, telling the truth, about how the neighborhood came to be, about who did the work, about who really belongs, becomes an act of reclaiming space. And doing it with humor allows the message to land without bitterness. It creates just enough discomfort to force reflection, while still giving people a chance to listen without becoming defensive. There's power in saying something true and sharp, wrapped in a sentence that makes people laugh before they realize what they've just learned. When Carol approached me, she didn't expect a response. She expected compliance. She expected a lowered gaze, maybe a mumbled apology, some signal that she had authority and that I recognized it. But what she got was a reminder. A reminder that the very ground she walks on didn't appear out of nowhere. That family community she was so eager to protect wasn't her invention, it was the result of someone else's labor, someone else's vision, someone else's hands. My family's hands. And when I pointed that out, not with confrontation, but with calm precision, it shifted the moment entirely. Telling that story now isn't about revenge or resentment. It's about clarity. It's about making visible what has always been there but never acknowledged. Every beam, every wall, every corner of this neighborhood has a story behind it, and most of those stories were never written by the people who now claim to define what the community means. Sharing those truths gives voice to the invisible and reminds people that belonging isn't granted by approval, it's earned through presence, work, and history. Humor helps make these stories relatable. It lowers defenses and invites people in. It reveals the absurdity of the assumptions and helps others see the cracks in the carefully curated image. A well-timed joke about how your husband built the gazebo where someone's now telling you to leash your dog can land harder than any formal argument. It's not just funny, it's factual, and it reclaims power in the most efficient way possible. Truth told plainly can feel like confrontation. Truth told with a little laughter can feel like liberation. For those of us who've been treated as if we just arrived, even though we've been here longer, worked harder, and contributed more, the act of speaking up, even lightly, even just once, shifts the balance. It reminds others that the community they think they're preserving didn't build itself. And it reminds us that we're not visitors, we're founders.